Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Hello and welcome back to Turning Readers into Writers and the final episode in the Author Accelerator series. And today I'm talking to Stacy Juba. Stacy published her first novel at age 18 and over the years has written sweet and sassy chick lit novels, mysteries about determined women sleuths, and entertaining books for young adults and children. Stacy is also a freelance developmental editor, creator of online courses for writers, and an award-winning journalist who has published more than 3,000 articles in newspapers and magazines. She is the founder of Shortcuts for Writers, and her goal is to take the writing and editing tips she learned in the trenches and simplify them for her clients and students. Her signature course, Book Editing Blueprint, a step-by-step plan to making your novels publishable, empowers fiction writers to think like an editor so they can save time and money. She also runs the Shortcuts for Writers Editing Made Simple Facebook group on Facebook. And I'm pleased to say too that Stacy, since we did that interview back in 2020, Stacy and I have become good friends, and I always learn something from her and really enjoy her company. I know you'll get a lot out of today's episode. She takes you through so many elements of the editing process, what to look out for. She explains how her course, Book Editing Blueprint, can help you. And I, for one, have gone through it and I use it when I'm editing too, before I send my book to my editor, so that I'm sending them the best possible draft I can, which means that they can do the best job that they can rather than trying to fix all my small errors. So I know you'll get a lot out of this. So let's have a chat with Stacy. Welcome, Stacy. Great to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Well, I wonder if you could start off by telling us kind of how you got into this crazy world of writing.
Yeah, I've been writing my whole life, really. I mean, I wrote my first story in third grade. By fifth grade, I was writing a mystery series about an amateur sleuth. And I wrote my first novel in high school. It was a ice hockey novel called Face Off for teenagers. I wrote it to entertain myself because I loved ice hockey at that time and I couldn't find any young adult books about hockey. So since I love to read, and I love to write, I said I should write my own. And I entered it in a competition for teenage writers that was sponsored by Avon Books. It was for ages 13 through 18, I think. And the winner got a publishing contract. In my freshman year in college, I found out that I won the contest. And this was back in 1992. So I got the book published and I got a lot of fan mail from kids and it made some reading lists. So it did really well. Unfortunately, there were some years of rejection after that. I had a lucky break, and then I had to pay my dues. And I think around 2010, I got my second book published, a mystery novel called 25 Years Ago Today. In between there, I was a newspaper reporter, did some like publicity for different organizations, like writing press releases. So I still did writing in my day job. But in 2010, when I got my book 25 Years Ago Today published, that's like when I launched my website, my stacyjuba.com website. And I got a second mystery novel published with the same publisher. It was a small mystery press. And then around this time is like when Kindle and ebooks was taking off. I brought my book Face Off that was out of print. I brought it back in paperback as print on demand, and I brought it back as an ebook, and then eventually as an Audible audiobook. I published a sequel to it, totally rewrote a sequel that had been in my drawer for years. So that was exciting. And then I got into freelance editing and online teaching. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it has. So you kind of done everything from like the front of house, if you like, doing the actual writing and being the author, and then kind of all the way through to backstage as well, kind of doing the editing. So I was interested there that it's quite good to note that you wanted to read something that wasn't there about reading kind of young adult ice hockey. And I love that idea of if you don't see what you want to read, then write it. It's I think it was it Toni Morrison that said that originally, or is quoted as kind of having said that. But it's a really great thing. Yeah, if you're able to do that, if you're not able to find what you want, then write it yourself. Yes, I love that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I think it's definitely, I mean, writing, it's a lot of discipline and hard work by yourself in a computer. So if you can write about something that you're excited about, that, you know, it's fun for you to write, I think that'll help keep you going. I still write about things I'm interested in, like with my Storybook Valley chick lit series. I just love Disney. I love theme parks. They make me happy. So when I sit down to write, you know, it puts me in a good mood. So.
And so you've mentioned there that you write different genres of book. So how do you find that kind of changing genre? Are they all for kind of young adult? I can't remember if your sleuth novels are sort of young adult as well. How do you find making that transition from one genre to the other?
Yeah, they're let's see, I have 3 young adult books, which is Face Off and Offsides, my 2 hockey novels book, and then I have a young adult paranormal thriller, Dark Before Dawn. My mysteries, 25 Years Ago Today, and Sink or Swim are for adults. Right. And then my chick lit Storybook Valley, they're kind of humorous, sweet romantic comedy books. Those are for adults also. And then I also have a couple of children's picture books, The Flag Keeper, which is about the U.S. flag code and flag etiquette, and the Teddy Bear Town Children's Bundle. So yeah, I've been all over the place, and it wasn't really something I intended to do. It was just like kind of, you know, my first book was Face Off, like the hockey book, and then I was young when I was still pretty young when I wrote my book Dark Before Dawn. It was a book that went in a drawer for several years because I had a lot of near misses of publishers. You know, it came close, but it didn't get published ultimately. I ultimately wound up self-publishing it after total rewrite. But at the time when I initially had that idea, I was still like 20, you know, young. So I was still kind of in touch with that young adult world. My book Offsides, my sequel to Face Off, it was a very interesting experience because I created those characters when I was 16 years old. So it was a very interesting experience revisiting them again, like in my 40s as a parent, you know. I had a totally different perspective. So it was kind of like a collaboration with my teenage self. You know, that was a really fun book because I found it very easy to get back into those teenage boys' minds, but I also had like this mom's perspective. So I developed the parents a lot more than I did in the first book. And, you know, I think I just kind of made the adults more 3-dimensional than I did in the first book because I just had a broadened perspective. So that was fun to do. And then mysteries was sort of like my first love growing up. I loved reading Nancy Drew books and Hardy Boys, Trixie Belden. So, even when I was a kid in fifth, sixth grade, I was writing mysteries. So that hockey book was kind of a detour for me just because I had gotten into hockey. But most of what I wrote back then was mysteries. So I decided to, in my 20s, when I was wanted to write my first adult novel, I was like, well, what should I write? And I decided to go with mystery just because, again, that's what I had always loved to read. And I found that writing for adults, I think, does come more naturally to me now than writing for teenagers. I just find that my adult books just come more easily to me, whereas like with the young adult books, I kind of have to, run things by my kids, or my husband's a high school teacher, I'll run things by him, because I'm not quite as in touch with that as I was when I was younger. And then I think my storybook Valley books, I never would have expected that I'd switch like to a chick lit, funny genre, because I think people would describe me as like serious and introverted, but as an adult, I discovered chick lit, like The Devil Wears Prada, Sophie Kinsella books, The Confessions of a Shopaholic, and I really loved the books. They made me laugh out loud. And then when I just got an idea for one, and I started to write it, and I found that it just came very naturally, and I liked kind of having that kind of lighter, humorous side of myself come out. And I think the biggest challenge for me with all of the books I've written was actually writing children's picture books. Because that is, even though they're short, it's really an art. It's something that they're not easy to write. It might look deceptively easy, but it really isn't. So I had a lot of critique partners that I work with at that time who are children's writers, and they helped me a lot. And children's picture books isn't like a genre that I'm comfortable editing. I don't take those on because I don't feel it's my strength. But I think I did do a good job with the ones that I had felt motivated to write. The time, like when my youngest daughter was a baby, I had undiagnosed like Hashimoto's, like hypothyroidism, and finding that I just didn't have the concentration to work on a novel. And I was reading a lot of picture books to my daughter at that time. So I was reading a lot in that genre, and then I just got an idea for because my husband liked to bring our U.S. flag in and out every night and every morning, and he taught me a lot about the U.S. flag code. Because I was like, why don't you just leave it out on the flagpole all the time? Why are you bringing it in and out? And he was talking about how we treat the flag with respect, and so that just gave me this idea for a children's picture book, and I just kind of went with it, and wound up publishing it, and I sent copies of it to directors of the National VFW and the National American Legion Post, and they gave me testimonials because it just kind of filled this kind of gap in knowledge, I think, for kids in the U.S., because a lot of them know about the origins of the flag, but they don't know how to treat it with respect. So I'm glad I wrote that book, and I did a couple other books during that time, also picture books, because I didn't have that concentration to focus on a novel until I got that my thyroid under control, and luckily I had some great critique partners and an agent at the time. I got a lot of feedback, but I don't think that's a genre I would go back to, just because it was harder for me than the others, than the mysteries and the chick lit. I think some genres do just come more naturally to you, and you just got to try different genres and see where you're comfortable.
Yeah. See what fits. So do you find that now do you just kind of write one genre at a time, or do you find that you can kind of swap between them? Because I love the fact that you've said it a few times now, I just had this idea and I thought I'm just going to go with it. So do you still write in that way, or are you a bit more targeted now and you think, okay, I've not written a sleuth one for a while, I better do that, or I've not written a chick lit for a while, I should give my readers another one of those? Are you a bit more kind of strategic about it now?
Yeah, I think I'm more strategic about it, just because in terms of, I've seen, more the business side of writing, and in terms of sales, like I think readers, especially like in the mystery genre or the romance genre, a lot of them gravitate towards series. They like series. So that's why I made my Storybook Valley novel a series, because so that it could kind of grow as I wrote more books. I've even heard that like around book 4 is when you really start putting a lot of money into advertising, because then you'll because then if you get readers hooked on the first book, they'll want to read the others. So that's kind of my strategy. And again, it's a series I love writing. So I think it's sort of like a combination of like the creative side, something I really want to write that I'm passionate about, but it's like a strategic business decision to make it a series, rather than to keep doing the standalone mysteries as I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I see myself kind of focusing more on that series. Although my hockey series, my first 2 books, the Hockey Rivals series, those sell really well. Like those sell copies every day. And I think it's because a lot of parents are looking for books for their teens. And there's not a lot of sports books or ice hockey books out there. And, there's just technology. There's so many different distractions. And it just seems like, parents are finding those books and buying them for the kids because they think it's something that might, grab their attention. And again, I like writing about those characters also. So I'm not opposed to writing like a 3rd book in that. I've been toying with an idea, but I think those for the foreseeable future, those 2 series are where I see myself writing.
Amazing. Cool. Oh, it's great. No, I love it. I love that you're cross genre there, keeping your options open. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to kind of, because we're here to talk about editing, so I kind of want to lead us on to that. Now you do quite a bit of editing, don't you? You're a developmental editor. Do you also do sort of line editing and copy editing as well?
I do sort of a mix of developmental and line editing. Copy editing, I'll do like light copy editing for sort of my clients that have more polished and stronger drafts, like structurally.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a client that has a lot of problems with grammar and punctuation, and a lot of people do, a lot of writers, the creative side comes more naturally to them, but the nitty-gritty of the commas and the semicolons and the dialogue punctuation is harder for them. So in those cases, I'd say you should really hire a copy editor and maybe even a proofreader, because I think it's hard for a developmental editor to do everything, because when they submit a book to me, I'm giving like an overall picture. Like I'm looking at the big things, like the characters and the structure of the plot, like for plot flaws, like their technique, like whether they, tell rather than show, or, if their style is passive or active, what kind of line editing do they need, like what kind of overused words are they using. So I'm kind of looking at everything, the big things and the small things, and I'll evaluate, like, yes, this is an author who's probably going to need to hire a copy editor, or proofreader, because, and I'll tell them that. I'll point out some of the issues that I'm seeing, but I'm not necessarily going to pick to fix each issue, because they'll become obsolete if they need to go back. You're right. And most of them will need to do some rewrites. So I'm kind of more focused on, the bigger picture and getting that draft as strong as possible structurally, and giving them some tips on how to improve the writing. And then, then they can focus on the copy editing later.
Because I remember when we've talked before about your shortcuts for writers, one of the reasons you said that you developed this program was because when you were doing these developmental edits for beginner writers, people new to writing, you found a lot of people were struggling with the same things, and you thought, okay, there's clearly a need here for people to be able to do those basic edits before hiring someone like yourself, a professional editor. So I kind of want to delve into that a little bit more, and I'd love to know your thoughts. If someone is they've written their first draft and they're really excited, and now they've got to start that editing process. And the best place to start, I think, is that overall kind of bird's eye structural edit, isn't it? What are your recommendations for somebody who's wanting to do that for the first time? How would you recommend they start that process of doing the big picture edit?
So I created my class sort of as a stepping stone, my book editing blueprint class as a stepping stone to hiring an editor, because what I was finding was that so many writers were hiring me too early, and I would hear the same thing from other editors. And I think what you have to learn how to do is teach yourself how to take the manuscript as far as you can on your own before you hire the editor, because editors are so expensive. I mean, I would say like to get if you have like a 300-page manuscript, you're probably not going to find a developmental editor for like under $700. And that's low. That's actually low. The average developmental editing costs are like $50 to $55 an hour. And that could just be like for a handful of pages per hour. So a lot of authors don't realize that going in, how expensive it is. And then the second thing is that they think that, okay, I'll hire an editor and then they'll send it back to me and I'll rewrite it. And then it's ready. Then it's ready to publish, or it's ready to send to an agent. And it's a process where it's usually with beginner writers, it's going back and forth multiple times. And of course you have to pay for the editor's time for each round. So again, it could be like another $700 and then another $700. And I've had some clients who, that are such beginners that they've never written anything before, and they might have some trouble with grammar and punctuation. So they're just trying to learn everything from the nuts and the bolts. And I've had some that ideally would have needed like 6, 7, 8 rounds of developmental editing, and that's before hiring a copy editor and proofreader. And of course, like nobody can afford that. So, so my advice is to learn as much as you can on your own, so that you're not sending like a first draft to an editor. You want to, and hiring an editor is definitely essential. There's even like authors who have contracts at mainstream traditional publishers who will hire a freelance editor first before they send a manuscript to the editor at their publishing house, because they want it to be as polished and strong as possible, because publishing, it's very competitive, and they want to send a manuscript, that's well developed and that they've taken as far as they can on their own, because that'll make them look good and make them, somebody attractive to work with. And so if experienced authors are hiring freelance editors, and it's definitely, you can see how like new authors, intermediate authors really need to hire one also, just to kind of, because it's so competitive. And even if you just want to indie publish, again, you got Amazon reviewers and customers. They won't be shy about leaving a 1-star review if your book has a lot of flaws in it. So, you really want to make sure that, number one, that you do hire an editor at some point, but before that, you want to learn how you can take the manuscript as far as you can on your own. So you want to look at things like, say, your characters and your plot. I have like a whole checklist of things to look at, both the big structural things and then the smaller kind of scene by scene things. And then like once you have like a draft that's pretty well developed, it's structurally sound, then you want to go through and do the line editing and the tightening and see if you can fix some of those copy editing issues. I mean, so like as you were saying, I've noticed that a lot of authors were making the same mistakes. So I think one of my kind of tips would be like, if you feel overwhelmed by the editing process and like, oh, there's something wrong with me, and I'm making so many mistakes. Everybody does, I did, everybody does. And, and it's the same. That's why I created the course, because I was seeing those exact same mistakes from so many different writers. So you just need to familiarize yourself with what these issues are and learn how you can take your manuscript as far as you can. And then it's time to invest in an editor.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if someone is, kind of just starting out, because I'm actually, for those people watching, I'm actually going through the program myself. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm going through it. So I found it really, really helpful. And if you were to kind of, just to sort of give viewers just a kind of flavor of how you teach, if we were to look at kind of doing a structural edit, the overall edit, is there any kind of guidance that you might give, or a top tip that you might give for doing that element of the editing? And then I would also ask, because you cover, as you say, like character setting, timelines and many things. Do you recommend doing them all at the same time, or do you recommend choosing, say, setting, and then going through the manuscript and looking at setting, and then going back and doing character, and then going, giving each element of the edit a separate pass, or doing it all at once while you go through it. So first of all, about the kind of the big picture edit, would there be a kind of top tip for that you might have for people?
Yeah, I recommend, and this is I do this myself, like for my book Offsides that I took out of my drawer, the one I wrote when I was like 18, 19, I always say that I was like my own worst client, because every single word had to be rewritten. So I followed this kind of system for that book also, because it was basically, I took this idea, I made a few things here and there, but I totally revamped it, and it would have been overwhelming to just kind of focus on everything at once, because there was just so much to fix. So I recommend you kind of start with the bigger things first, like one big problem that a lot of manuscripts have from newer writers is that they don't have enough plot points. And so I recommend that you follow like a 3-act structure, where we have your beginning, where you're setting up the premise and you're giving your character like a clear goal and hitting at some conflict. And then the middle tends to fall short for a lot of newer writers, where they just don't have enough conflict, or they make things too easy, or they wrap up everything just way too easily. And then there should be a point in the manuscript, like if it's like a 300-page book, maybe the last 75 pages or so, it should really be building and building and building toward this climax. And a lot of manuscripts will just kind of fizzle out, and then the last 75 pages will just be kind of episodic, or more like a prolonged epilogue, Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of times you can see this in the blurbs that they write, because I always ask them to submit a blurb with their manuscript, just so when I'm editing their book, just so I can kind of see what their vision was. In a lot of times, the blurb doesn't have enough in it either. It's just not as meaty as it should be. It doesn't have enough twists and turns. So that's one thing you just want to really focus on first, because it doesn't matter how well like your page is line edited if your whole middle like doesn't have enough conflict and plot twists. So you want to just focus on that and look at the 3-act structure and how is your character changing from beginning to end, and make sure you know your character well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the first focus, and then
just to pick up on that there, that's interesting that you ask for the blurb as well at the same time from your client. So for you, what do you want to see in, because I think that's probably a really good idea. I've heard that before from other editors, saying that if your blurb is strong, then it shows you've got a strong idea for your story, and you can keep coming back to that, and that can, as you're writing, that can give you your North Star, keep you focused. What do you like? What, in an ideal world, what do you like to see as the kind of perfect blurb from your clients? Is it because is that the same as having a short synopsis, or is it something quite different?
I'd say it's different. Like a synopsis is more like maybe like a 1 to 3 page document that you would send like to an agent, kind of giving them an overview of what's in each chapter, and except writing it more of like an enticing kind of way. So it's not just like a book report. So it's synopsis are kind of challenged, where you're trying to make it sound interesting and, flow well, but you basically want to show that, exactly what's happening in each chapter and how it's all going to tie together, because that'll show that your book is kind of has a solid structure and it's well thought out. And the blurb is more like what you'd see like on the back cover, or what you'd see on a retail site like Amazon. I have a Facebook group called Shortcuts for Writers, Editing Made Simple, and I have a free book blurb toolkit in the unit section in Unit 1. So and I go through it that I wrote up something, which is kind of giving my advice of what should be in the blurb. And it kind of varies depending on your genre. So one of the things I recommend is like going on a little scavenger hunt, like on Amazon, like take your genre, like if you write like paranormal fantasy, or if you write sweet romance or steamy romance, or whatever you write, young adult, go find some of the successful books in your genre and look at like at least like 20 blurbs, and kind of see if you notice any patterns. There might be certain words that jump out at you, like, you know, in like an action book or suspense book, they're going to use kind of more gripping, intriguing, you know, kinds of words than like a quieter, you know, women's fiction novel. So you want to kind of get a feel for those successful blurbs, because those are the ones, if the book's doing well and successful, then it's attracting readers. So you want to kind of get a feel for that. And I think you want to kind of focus just on maybe like one or two of your main characters. For example, like a romance novel, you usually would focus on two of them in the blurb, like with naming them. You don't want to name a lot of characters in your blurb, because that's going to get off focus. You just want to kind of boil it down to the, you know, really the most important characters, like the protagonist or the antagonist or love interest, or and then try to hit on the different plot points. You know, the biggest. You know, some of you don't have to give everything away. You don't want to give everything away, but just kind of hint that, you know, what the danger is. You know, like, for example, like I recently edited a manuscript where it was one of those books where there wasn't enough in the middle, and it just kind of went on. It was almost like a very long epilogue, and the blurb just kind of hinted like, oh, you know, they face troubles or something, you know, like that. But it didn't delve into what those troubles were, and then neither did the book. It was just kind of all wrapped it up. So basically, you want to make sure that you're hitting on these different plot points. You want to have plot points at different points in your book, and you want to kind of hint at that in your blurb.
Okay.
Because if you don't have enough to write about in your blurb, then you probably don't have enough to carry a book, you know.
That's a good way of looking at it. No, so that's the kind of the big picture, the developmental. And then, as I said, your course goes through all the different elements of, you know, I gave the examples of setting, character, timeline. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. So now, do you recommend trying to tackle them all in one pass, in one read of the manuscript, or do you recommend going back and doing them all individually, especially, you know, if you're a beginner and this is all still quite new?
The way I do it, the way I recommend doing it, is doing it individually. So once you've got, you know, your basic, your plot and your character arc, and you feel like you've got your basic storyline is there, then you want to kind of fill it in. So you can go back and I would like look at all the, like if there's, I can often, like, I'll start with my characters. Like, okay, let's say there's something they have like a journey, like what's their journey from beginning to end, and make sure that you have some scenes that show that. So that would be sort of like the first thing, making sure that you kind of glance through your book and see, is it clear? Like, is your character's journey clear? Do you have enough? That's kind of, you don't want to like beat the reader over the head with it. Like, okay, this is what you have to learn from this character. But for example, like in my Cinderella book, you know, it sort of follows the Cinderella theme, where she kind of does things for everybody else, and she doesn't put herself first, and she needs to kind of nurture herself more, and, you know, not just always say yes to things. So I had to make sure I'd go through and make sure I have some scenes that illustrate that kind of thing. And then again, look at your supporting characters. Do they all have a purpose? And does any of, you know, if a character has a purpose, like to sort of be a source of conflict or to be a confidant, are you using that character enough? Can you go through and look at those scenes? You know, did you describe all your minor characters, and, you know, do you need them all? If there are any that just don't really seem to add anything, like you could combine, because sometimes I've seen like new writers have like too many characters, and it's hard to tell them apart. You know, so sometimes you can kind of just get rid of a couple. It's painful, but, you know, do you really miss them when they're gone? You know, and then I like to look at like all my description. Like I'll go through and look at, you can even use a highlighter, you know, different colors highlighters. Like I like to print out hard copies, and usually I'll be printing out multiple hard copies. Like I'll print out a hard copy, then I'll go through it, looking at my characters and, you know, my description, you know, I'll highlight all my description and then go through it and just make sure I've just described everything to the way that I want it. Sometimes like I might need to do research to make a description come alive better. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I might like put a note in the margin, like, okay, do some research, come back to this. And so I just want to really focus on all my descriptions and my settings, make sure every scene has a setting. look at the beginning of every scene, because sometimes new authors have a tendency to just kind of start with dialogue, and you don't really know where they are, kind of like talking heads, or they maybe continue from the last chapter, and it's like, okay, this is continuing, but people might have put the book down, and you're not necessarily remember where they are. Or make sure that every scene is maintaining that setting, because a lot of writers, beginner writers, will just kind of, okay, maybe at the beginning of the scene, they'll say where they are, and then the scene just goes on for 5 pages, and they're just talking, and the author forgot to weave in the setting details, so you want to make sure that you're looking at every scene, and can you visualize the setting? Are you maintaining the setting? Is there any more props you can use? So that kind of thing. So
yeah, I certainly found that today. I was doing some editing, and I was thinking about your program, and I was like, yep, I've just found some talking heads. So then I had to kind of reframe that and give them some context as to where they were. Yeah. One of the other things that your course is really, I find really, really useful, is helping us to with the words that we use. So you encourage us to move from passive to active words, and I think that's right, from passive to active, so that the character is taking action rather than action happening to them. So I found that really useful. I wonder if you talk a little bit about that, and then maybe we could also talk about how each of us have words that we return to again and again, and we use them repetitively without realizing it, and how we might be able to pick that up and stop doing that.
Yeah. So one thing that a lot of authors do is using a lot of was and were, and I always say that you're never going to have a book without was or were. It's impossible. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the was or were, but you want to make sure that you're not seeing it multiple times, in a paragraph or on the page. So, if you can go through, if you highlight all the was and were, if you're seeing it a lot of times on the page, and then you're probably writing too passively. And this is probably an issue that's going to kind of, go through the whole book. If you see it pages, it's probably going to be through your whole book, and that's an editing pass that you want to do. I mean, hopefully, it's sort of as you go, once you realize this, as you go back and you're doing those other editing passes, focusing on your your characters and your setting and your plot and everything, that should be in your mind. So hopefully you'll start writing those new scenes or doing these rewrites more actively. But you'll definitely want to do a pass, just kind of going through the manuscript and making sure that every scene is as active as it can be, that you're not seeing a lot of was and were. If you are, if you're seeing a lot of sentences like he was, she was, they were, is, are, be, then you want to try to see if you can turn some of those around and make them more active. A lot of times you can just easily do that. I'm trying to think of an example, if some authors will kind of tell rather than show, well, she was happy or she was mad. So you want to find a way to show that rather than just telling us. So that kind of thing. You just want to look for things like that. Or there were books on the bookcase, you could say something like books line the bookcase, just to give you the examples of the kind of things to look for. Yeah. And then as far as overused words, there's a whole list of words that I see used over and over again, by different writers. Look is probably the number one word. I mean, I've seen that used, 300, 400 times, in some books.
Okay.
Even by some published authors, best-selling authors. I was reading a book recently, and there was look used a few times on the same paragraph, and I was like, oh my gosh, I would just, it's so good, but I would, they think could be made even better by just changing one. We didn't need to have all those looks in that paragraph. So I'm telling you, everybody does it, but just at different extents.
So and just to kind of just to say as well, in Stacy's program, you very helpfully do give us a list of those very common words that we can look for in our own manuscript, and I've certainly found that really useful. So I just wanted to. Okay.
Yeah, so it's the words look, took, turn, walk, and I recommend just kind of going through it, and depending on with your preferences. If you have a hard copy, you could go through and just highlight looking for those words. See, I look, I can't get around it. Again, you don't have to eliminate everyone from your character's vocabulary or from your vocabulary, but you want to make sure that you don't, if you have like a 300-page manuscript, maybe you want to try to get it down to 30 or 40 looks. You don't want to have like 100, 200, 300 looks, because those are just, and then usually when authors have like a lot of one words, that means they probably have a lot of walks, or they have a lot of, tooks. And that's just going to add up. It's like have a cumulative effect, where if you're using these words over and over again, it's just going to have this cumulative effect where your writing isn't going to be as vivid or as unique as it could be, because you're kind of relying on bland words. So you could either go through and highlight them and just kind of ferret them out and rework them, or you could use the search bar and just put your most common words in it, put look in, and then it'll take you through, and you can kind of evaluate each one, and, just determine which ones you want to keep, which ones you want to rework, or which ones you can just kind of totally delete and nobody will ever notice. So,
but interesting, when we were talking earlier, you were telling me a funny story about how it's not just those kind of common words. It can be even more unusual words, and you gave me a lovely example earlier with your own work.
Yeah, sometimes so there's a really common words that everyone overuses, and then some writers, just for whatever rhyme or reason, they just have their own list of words that they use again and again, and just kind of stick in their mind. And one time I was like really surprised, because I hate snakes. I like absolutely hate them. Like my family laughs at me. Like if one comes on TV in a quick commercial, I'll like scream. I have to look away if my husband and I are watching something and there's one, and he'll tell me when I can look again. So, I mean, it's like really bad. So a reader of my mystery novels wrote to me, and she was telling me, oh, I really enjoyed your books and everything. But she's like, I was just really curious. Are you afraid of reptiles? Because I noticed you used the word reptilian maybe 3 or 4 times over, across a couple of your different books to describe like something scary, or, describe somebody's face or features. And I was like, yes, I'm afraid of snakes. So now, that's just always in my head. Like if I'm writing something, oh, did I use reptilian?
I love it. So Stacy, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
And to everybody, have a good rest of the day wherever you are in the world. And I shall see you all again tomorrow. Bye. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.